Salutations, denizens of YouTube. Now, as has been requested of me for a while now, actually, this podcast is going to be reviewing, of course, the premiere episode, or episodes, I should say, of The Legend of Korra, the Avatar sequel series. Not Avatar James Cameron, of course, Avatar The Last Airbender. Those get really confusing at times. Yes. So the show literally just premiered. I finished watching it. For whatever reason, my original review of the first series is actually still one of my most watched videos, and apparently people liked my opinions on that one and have been for the past couple of months continually sending me messages going, "Are you going to review this when it comes out?" So yes, I am finally reviewing it. In fact, I might do a weekly review of the episodes, or of the show, so because apparently people watch that. But regardless, time to get back on task. The show premiered. Overall, I liked it. This really is a good complement to the series, which did feel, in a way, kind of unfulfilled since we never saw the airbending training, or we never saw Aang learn his airbending training. And for a show that philosophically concentrates so much on a cycle and completing a cycle and all that stuff, to kind of miss out on that is kind of a big hole. So I'm glad we actually get to see that element, the philosophy behind airbending. We got little hints of it here and there when they kind of talked about firebending, and especially when they were in book 2, and they were doing the earthbending training, because it was his opposite, which they kind of changed that. I did notice they changed that. Speaking of which, in the series they said it was Aang had such a hard time learning it was because Earth is the opposite of air, and Katara should have had the hardest time learning fire, when in fact it looks like that's what she enjoys using the most. Wait, did I say Katara? I mean Korra, sorry. So it's very good that we get to finally see this kind of completion, this kind of filling in of the gap of the series, although I have seen there's been some indication that they want to do a second season of this, and I'm not sure where they're going to go from there. I mean, I guess that they're going to make it a more plot-centric as opposed to being, how should I put it? What type of centric? Element-centric. Unless they reintroduce that whole energy bending thing that they kind of was a little bit Deus Ex Machina in the end of the original series. But regardless, let's get into the actual characters. We have, of course, our main character, Korra. Definitely they're emphasizing her kind of recklessness, her kind of, just bam, use my fire. Except she doesn't sound like that, obviously. Her recklessness, her inexperience, well, not experience, overly naturally talented. She definitely overconfident. I was actually somewhat worried when they were going to do that with her character, because this is what they overcompensate. Often writers will do this when they make a female character that's supposed to be action-centric. They will overcompensate for her being a female, trying to make her too much into the action and the explosions and being all tough, too much of a tomboy. And I don't actually cancel that. I don't like the term tomboy for describing her, but too much. You get the idea. They kind of go a little too overboard. However, that is basically a big center plot point. Is she isn't ready. She is kind of too reckless and rambunctious and Generation X-y. So they at least seem to be trying to address that. They have to calm her nerves and such. And they also were, at least apparently, were aware of it enough to give her a good foil in her airbending instructor, Tenzin, who is not played by, but voiced by J.K. Simmons. Those of you will probably recall him as Jenna Jameson in the Spider-Man series. He also does those pharma commercials. He was also the guy from Portal 2 doing all the crazy voices. What was the guy's name? I'm sure somebody will post it. But he's a hilarious actor, a comedic actor. And, well, I mean, they do say that the best comedic actors actually make the best drama, or best dramatic actors are always comedians, and he's certainly funny. But they have him playing the ultra cool, collective, very zen Tenzin, who is the son, of course, of Aang. And he's a very good. They play off each other very well. Her kind of, she's so rambunctious that she kind of even drives him to the point of going red in the face, literally. So it's a very good relationship that they seem to be building up there. Of course, he has his kids who also seem to be a little too hyper. They're bipolar. Maybe that's something with airbending, I guess. But his children are completely bipolar except for the one, his oldest. But the two others are kind of crazy, and then they can just go into their meditated states. So you might want to get that diagnosed. That's it. I mean, we're still early in the series, so we're just getting into the characterization. But to talk about the plot itself, or at least I should say more of the setting, when it comes to the new setting, which is going to be, instead of going over the entire world, which we've basically seen at this point from the original series, instead we're going into the one specific location, the new element of these. What they turned into what started off as the Fire Nation colonies have now become kind of like a united collection of city-states, I'm getting the impression. And this one particular city-state, Republic City, very creative name, is the centerpiece of this. And by the way, it's New York City. It's New York City from 1920. Which is the other thing I wanted to address on this series, is the writers and producers of this series must have a serious love affair with the 1920s, because everything of this is this flowing 1920s in every way. Not just, the classic gangster and jazz club scene, although they certainly had that, especially in the music. They really took kind of the traditional soundtrack from the first series, but then they added a lot of 1920s beats to it, which is very good. And everyone kind of likes the 20s. There's something about that particular decade that it's always been stylistic. So it is actually a pretty good one to hit on. No one ever thinks that the 20s is the one decade that has never aged badly. No one ever looks at the stuff in the 20s and goes, look at the silliness of those people. Everyone kind of looks back at the 20s and goes, those people had some freaking style. Yeah, I'm trying to watch the language on this particular podcast here, because just based on the source material I'm reviewing, we might have some of the younger ones there. So I used the other. I didn't use perhaps some language I normally would. Plus, I have nothing to curse at with this episode, with the series thus far, because it's pretty good. But there are some questions, or at least there's some mysteries they're trying to add in with the kind of this equalist idea movement, which thus far we know more from the commercials about the new villains than we do from the actual series. They kind of, which is good. I like that they slowly start introducing these things. It looks like next week's episode is going to actually introduce them fully, but they show kind of the hints, and they actually kind of make some good points on a philosophical level when they kind of, Korra, when she arrives in the city, runs into an equalist, and he kind of verbally beats her down. He's, you're a bender. You want to just blow me right off this stand? She goes, yeah, I do. See? It's kind of an interesting point, especially right after that. They kind of see that the benders are also the gangsters. You see, right after that scene, you see it is the gangsters who are benders who are the ones forcing people to give them money, or doing their racketeering. And of all the elites we see, they're all benders. We see Tenzin, who is a councilman of the city. We know the Toph's daughter is the head of the police. She's a bender. So it's rather interesting to see that there maybe is a little something to the equalist movement. And I'm also curious who they're going to who is going to be the guy behind the mask. I have a feeling they're not going to show what was his name? Manon? I think that's what they said his name was. They said it very quickly. Wikipedia will answer it for me. Amon. Amon, jeez. They're really going with the satanic acronyms, aren't they? Yeah. We have a Mon who, I don't think they're going to have him take the mask off next episode. One, it's a much cooler character design without the mask, and I think it's going to be one of those things that is going to get the fans kind of talking, who's the guy behind the mask? I guarantee you he is the son of one of the major characters in the previous series. I guarantee you. This is the way that this is how these series work. Everyone is related to everybody. It's like the Deep South. But I guarantee you they'll try to do some sort of connection back to the original series. But it's going to be more interesting because this is one of those series, and this is the reason I'm watching that, and I'm watching this, and I don't watch, let's say, other stuff on Nickelodeon, other than occasionally watching that Dragon Ball Z Kai, because that's literally just a trimmed-down version of the exact same show I grew up on. Well, not grew up on, I watched it very sparingly, but I've become more of a fan. But I digress, as so often happens. It's going to be very interesting, but I am going to wonder if the writers are going to take that kind of more mature approach and kind of show maybe there is something to these guys. Maybe there's a little bit of something to this. Especially if they seem to be as big of fans as the 1920s. I don't know if you want to call it decades have fans, but they are really encapsulated with everything 1920s. Because let's face it, the 1920s, when it comes to, we think of terrorism as a modern phenomenon, but terrorism has been around for a long time. And if you're talking about the 1920s, we are talking about the era of Sacco and Vanzetti. For those of you who do not know who they are, pay attention in history class. I guess I'll recap real quick. Those were two that were had some radical political views and were basically executed for a crime that there was very, very, very little evidence that they ever committed it. Were executed for just fear of their political movements, because this is an era where maybe there wasn't a lot of attacks in the United States. There was, of course, gangsterism, but there was a big fear of it because in Europe bombings were occurring all the time. This is when the Tsar, well, I shouldn't say in Russia itself, because at this point Russia is in full-fledged civil war. But this is a time when there was a real feel that communists in the 1920s were going to take over and really cause some problems. And there was some elements of legitimacy to a lot of the communist claims. This is an era really when you finally saw big labor movements come out of the United States and gain some legitimacy. And probably one of the things that helped stem the tide a bit of that kind of political movement towards communism was, at least it took a lot of fighting by unions to adjust that, because if they didn't, a lot of people were starting to think maybe we should go to this communist ideal and maybe we should use violence to achieve these ideals. Just because it didn't have an Islamic flavor on it didn't mean the 1920s didn't have their share of shall we say, revolution, comrade? So it's going to be very interesting to see if they kind of bring in those elements, especially with kind of anarchist movements and stuff like that. If these equalists are going to have a similar feel to them, I'm sure there's going to be some surprises with their movement along the way, or maybe they'll make them like an Illuminati group who wants control. I'm sorry, I've been playing Deus Ex recently. But I'm very interested in how they do that. I'm also really interested. They really advanced very quickly in this world. They went from basically having like a Tolkien, Lord of the Rings style existence to full-fledged 1920s with a slightly different tech base. In the span of one generation, or maybe technically 2 generations, we'll assume, and Aang was basically still a kid. He was like 15 at the end of the series, I think, something like that. So, and he lived to like over 100, so about 90 years. Okay, so maybe not that. Still, that's pretty dramatic. I mean, you didn't see that kind of change happen in the real world. It took, a couple of centuries, not just under one. Anything else I want to address? It's going to be an interesting series. It's interesting how they kind of bring in the professional bending, which I guess would be what you could kind of see that once you get to the 20s. Which, by the way, the best thing about the series, they bring back the 1920s style sports announcer. We need those sports announcers back again. Those are the best. With that whole element, you kind of, at points, you're kind of wondering how the hell the series is, or at least that game is set up, because it seems like there's supposed to be 3 rounds, but it seems like whoever wins the last round wins, regardless if the other team won 2 previously. Why have the other 2 rounds? Maybe I'm missing something. I mean, I only saw the series once, and that might have been the point where I grabbed a snack, where there was maybe a quick little tidbit on that. But it does seem like they lose. Like the team Korra joins, she loses the first 2 rounds, and then they win the last round, and then they're declared the winners. I don't get that. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Everything else, it seems like they actually developed a pretty good rule base, which I guarantee you, video game. I guarantee you they're going to do that. That's going to be, if not a game by itself, they'll probably make it part of a game, because they did that for the others. Every season had its own video game dedicated to it. So, mark my words. But overall, because I don't think I can really think of much more, I am excited for this series. It's one of the few series I'm going to be watching, since I really don't watch much television nowadays. It's kind of all on the internet. I watch The Walking Dead. I think if Hell on Wheels comes back, I'll watch that. And I'll watch this, because there's surprisingly not a whole lot of good stuff out there nowadays. Well, I think I've already hit on some of my speculation for the rest of the series. I guarantee you we're going to see at least one other character come back from the original series. Oh, wait. Scratch everything. I have one more big question I need answered. Okay, I get the point how there's now new airbenders, because if you have... all Tenzin had to do was hook up with another person and he can produce airbenders. That makes sense. You only need one airbender to create more. I get that ideal, and especially if you're introducing the ideal balance, then the world is probably making all of Aang's descendants have airbending because they need to repopulate the airbenders in order to maintain or reacquire balance. So there's even the supernatural thing explained why every single one of them, in what should be a relatively rare trait, is producing a ton of airbenders. Okay, it's the world rebalancing itself by producing more benders of air. But how? Oh, how are there more air bisons? Appa was the last air bison. How is there a new one? Is there a backstory they're going to explain at some point on that? You can't just throw that one out. They implied that he was the last one. Is there like a backstory? I want them to address that as part of the backstory. At some point, they need to go, how is there another air bison? Did you find a missing herd at some point? Okay. They could have actually left it that it was... in my opinion, they actually could have kept it that it was Appa. Because you can just say, well, air bisons live for centuries. Okay, I can buy that. So they better address that. Other things I want to see them address is, of course, I want to see somebody else from the old series. There's some rumors that Zuko is back, or he's still alive. It's possible. Qatar is around. We know that... we do know that Sokka's dead, unfortunately. That's the only him and Aang are the only 2 characters that are absolutely confirmed dead and deceased. Although Aang we might see in his, avatar spirit form. But Sokka's as dead as disco. So I'd be curious to see it, because I guarantee you they're going to bring somebody back and say, he's still alive because Korra's around. So of course somebody else. Toph's a good candidate because her daughter's running things, so I don't see why she wouldn't be around. Of course, we do see little hints, little statues of people all over the place. So there's certainly a lot of hints and such on it. I'm curious what other 1920s elements they'll try to bring in. If they'll introduce kind of movies, I can imagine them trying to do like a 1920s movie version of the original series and like have that be like kind of the premiere, kind of the golden age of Hollywood episode. I guarantee you they'll do that. I'm curious if they're ever at some point going to go a little bit beyond Republic City and show us a little bit either of the Earth Kingdom or the Fire Nation. We have seen a little bit of the Southern Water Tribe. They look exactly the same, so I guess development has not reached them fully. Be curious, especially if they do a second season. It'll be very interesting to see what they're doing. Because I have no idea where the story will go. I guess we're gonna have to see how they work out with these elementalists. Perhaps the elementalists will wind up gaining control of another of the nations, like the Earth Nation or something, and we'll have like a good old-fashioned Soviet Union, comrade. Maybe, we'll see. Well, that is... Oh, one last thing. Almost forgot. Guarantee this is the last thing. Was the art style very consistent with the first series, so it does feel very natural. It doesn't feel that much of a new series. It does feel like a continuation almost. But the artists they can't draw small children. They have a real problem with it. The youngest of Tenzin's kids look really weird for the art style that they went with. Especially the youngest one. He looks like he should be in a different cartoon. Or anime, depending on which side of the debate. There's a debate with Avatar. Is it Avatar? Is it anime? Is it a cartoon? Why can't it be both? Anyway. Yeah, they have a really weird way of drawing small children. They probably thought it was cute. Or either that or it was Nickelodeon executives thinking, we want them to be cuter. Make it more like our other cartoons. I hope that wasn't the case. But regardless, here's to hopefully having a good season. I'm sorry if I go a little long. That's the point of my reviews. I try to make every review go at least 20 minutes. I don't know if I'll be doing that for every individual episode review. Probably won't, because for a 30-minute show, there's not that much to talk about. Especially because, like 10 minutes of that 30-minute show are commercials. But, yeah, hoping we'll have some more episodes. Looks like we'll have an interesting series. Next episode looks to be more interesting, where we'll really get into the thick of the plot, where we really get these equalists revealed. So tune in for that. Sayonara.